no Freddy Krueger, Mike Myers, Jason Voorhees, we're bored of them, get us some new ones. There's plenty of great slasher villains out there that don't get enough praise. So I'm Amy from What Culture, and here are the 10 most underrated slasher movie villains. 10. Frank ZITO, Maniac. A remake of William Lustig's 1980 video nasty, the 2012 version cast Elijah Wood as the demented Frank ZITO, a mannequin store owner and murderer. A troubled young man with a fetish for collecting human scalps, Frank's life is further complicated when he begins to fall for artist and photographer Anna. Struggling to balance his growing affection for Anna with his passion for murdering women, Frank cuts a bloody swathe through Los Angeles before finally coming for Anna directly. Whilst Lustig's original movie is considered to be a cult classic in some circles, this remake isn't to be sniffed at either. Wood is delightfully chilling as Frank, building on the budding menace viewers first saw him display in 2005's Sin City, and marking the star as one of his generation's most interesting character actors. His Frank ZITO really does emerge as one of horror cinema's creepier slasher villains. 9. Victor CROWLEY, HATCHET. Having starred in 4 movies to date, Victor CROWLEY is one of the more well-known slasher villains on this list. First appearing in 2006's Hatchet, CROWLEY is a combination of vengeful ghost and hillbilly, rising from the grave every night to avenge his death and that of his father. Born of a voodoo curse and killed by a hatchet to the head, Victor CROWLEY is one of the most unstoppable slasher villains of all time, utterly indestructible and perpetually pissed off. And yet, in spite of CROWLEY's fine heritage, created by modern horror talent Adam Green and played by bona fide icon Kane Hodder, the character rarely gets the recognition he deserves. I mean, how many other original post-noughties horror creations can boast as many sequels as Victor CROWLEY? 8. President Reagan, Tripper. Directed by Scream's David Arquette, this horror comedy from 2006 sees a serial killer running riot at a music festival for hippies. The twist? Everyone is stoned out of their mind and the killer is dressed as Ronald Reagan. Having starred in every installment of the Scream franchise to date, David Arquette should know his slasher movies, and he does. This is evident in Tripper, a bitingly funny, gory hack-em-up and a love letter to 80s slashers. Arquette's cast is great, but it's the villain who really steals the show. Stomping about the place clad in a suit and a Ronald Reagan mask, this dead president is at once amusing and unnerving, and dispatching his victims with increasingly grotesque methods from chainsaws to axes, he's certainly not afraid to get messy. 7. Matt Cordell, Maniac Cop. Matt Cordell is the titular villain of the Maniac Cop trilogy, a series of 80s and 90s slasher movies which follow a zombie cop murdering crooks and innocents alike on the streets of New York. Wrongly accused of Cordell's crimes, Jack fights to clear his name, going toe-to-toe with the murderous cop in the first film's finale. It's mostly downhill from there, but by the time the series reaches its 3rd installment, the hulking, menacing Matt Cordell is a tremendous horror creation. Think Jason Voorhees in a cop uniform. It's no cinematic genius, and it doesn't necessarily have the staying power of bigger villains like Krueger, but Maniac Cop is one of the 80s most unusual slasher movies with fun action, a great cast, and a fantastic villain. 6. Leslie Vernon. Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon. Scott Glosserman's 2006 comedy horror mockumentary follows a group of filmmakers as they document the life and crimes of an aspiring serial killer called Leslie Vernon. And in spite of the film garnering acclaim as a minor cult classic, the career of Leslie Vernon never did take off. It's a shame because Behind the Mask is such a great little slasher film, with a compelling villain in Leslie Vernon. The outwardly normal Leslie turns his obsession with slasher movies into a horrifying hobby, masking up at night to stalk and slash terrified teens. Self-referential without being too irritating about it, and featuring cameos from such horror royalty as Robert Englund, Behind the Mask is a tremendous little slasher movie, and with the mask donned, Leslie Vernon is every bit as chilling as Freddy, Jason, or Michael at their best. 5. Baghead Jason Voorhees. Friday the 13th, Part 2. Jason Voorhees. Underrated? Surely not. As the #1 killer of the Friday the 13th franchise, not counting the entries from his mum and Part 5's copycat killer, nobody could ever suggest that Jason Voorhees doesn't get enough love from the horror community. But what do we think of when we think of Jason Voorhees? First and foremost, I'd say it's probably the hockey mask. It's easy to forget that Jason's hockey mask didn't actually appear in a Friday the 13th film until 1982's Part 3. Before that, Jason was forced to make do with a heavy burlap sack, a piece of string, and an eye hole. It's not as slick or as instantly iconic as the hockey mask, but Part 2 heralded the arrival of Jason good and proper. Clad in dungarees and a plaid shirt and doing away with victims using a pickaxe, pitchfork, and his trusty machete, Jason's Part 2 look really nails the heart of the character. Jason Voorhees, the hulking menace, a man of simple pleasures and a little bit of a hillbilly. The hockey mask is great, but we should be careful not to forget the character's grimy roots. 4. Mahogany. Midnight Meat Train. Footballer turned actor Vinnie Jones may not be the greatest thespian of his generation, but there's no denying that the man can do a good villain, after stealing the show in Guy Ritchie's Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels and its spiritual sequel Snatch. Vinnie Jones turned his talent to being a horror villain in the Clive Barker adaptation Midnight Meat Train. Based on Barker's short story, the film follows a photographer as he stalks the late-night subway in search of something to shoot. Here, he encounters serial killer Mahogany, slaughtering midnight commuters on the desolate midnight ride. Deciding to trail the brute, the photographer soon finds himself in far too deep with a force that's at once mind-blowing, not of this world, and all too real. And by all too real, I mean the bone-crunching violence. At the heart of it, it's an impressive performance from Vinnie Jones, in a role which plays to his strengths perfectly. As the snappily dressed hulking great monster, Mahogany emerges as one of the decade's most menacing horror villains. So yeah, maybe don't get the midnight train anytime soon. Maybe get an Uber. 3. Edward Lionheart, Theatre of Blood. In this 1973 comedy horror, Vincent Price plays an actor called Douglas, who vents his rage at the critics who panned him and his performances by brutally slaughtering them. This horror icon is great fun as a jaded actor, offing his victims in a series of delightfully camp and increasingly elaborate set pieces. Crucially, Price doesn't take himself too seriously in this lead role, dressing up in a series of silly outfits and daft guises, including a mustachioed chef and a disco-permed hairdresser. It's hard to imagine anyone else in the role, nor any actor having quite as much fun with it as he did. The character is a perfect mashup of character and actor, and one of the funniest, most creative slasher movies ever made. 2. The Killer, Urban Legend. 1998's Urban Legend is one of the best rip-offs of the post-Scream period. A genuinely great slasher film on its own terms, director Jamie Blanks created a compelling murder mystery rich with vibrant characters and fun performances. It also had a tremendous villain in its axe-wielding, parka-wearing killer. This semi-masked psychopath is killing her victims using the Urban Legend theme, and in her parka, Brenda cuts a truly imposing figure. The unmasking moment at the end undercuts some of that menace, but she's still a chilling prospect once the hood goes up. The nature of this movie could have led to multiple killers or outings for the Parker slasher, but sadly this wasn't to be. The film's failed sequels went a little more literally on the urban legend mythos, relegating its hooded slasher to the sidelines. It's a shame because the franchise had something truly special for a moment there. 1. Harry Warden and the Copycats, My Bloody Valentine. No one slasher villain was robbed of a franchise like Harry Warden and the killers he inspired. A boiler-suited, gas mask-wearing, pickaxe-wielding psychopath offing the residents of a small town on Valentine's Day, Harry is a tremendous-looking slasher villain. The antagonist of 1981's My Bloody Valentine, and then its 3D remake in 2009, Harry Warden was said to be a demented miner driven mad after a tragic collapse in which he was forced to eat his own friends in order to survive. In both the 1981 and 2009 movies, though everyone suspects Warden is up to his old tricks, the killer is revealed to be a copycat, traumatized by Harry's earlier rampages and adopting his identity to commit murderous crimes of their own. This gimmicky reveal may have shot My Bloody Valentine 3D's chances of a sequel in the foot, especially given that the costume was pretty much jettisoned for the film's last act, but the film is great fun when it's just Harry stomping about murdering folk. Really though, Harry Warden deserved better. And that brings us to the end of this list of the 10 most underrated slasher movie villains. If you would have put some other villains on this list, then let us know who you would have put in the comments down below. And remember to check out whatculture.com for more lists and articles like this every single day. As always, I've been Amy from What Culture, and I'll catch you next time.